Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video I am back talking about Power Rangers. Or last year I did a retrospective of season 1 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for its 30th anniversary, to where here, a year later, where I'm going to be talking about season 2 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which is a season that I never particularly liked. It's a season I hated when I was a kid, feeling like it was a season where a lot of just nothing happens. It's a season that is filled with filler and it not really progressing many storylines or really just adding much depth to any of the characters involved. And I could say now, having just rewatched the season, that I think I actually dislike the season even more now than what I used to. Mind you, I think partially for different reasons, as again, I still stand by the opinion that yes, a lot of this season is just generic filler that isn't particularly interesting, but I think there's a lot more fundamental issues that go on with this season that, again, I'll talk about throughout this video. Now, straight up, I am looking at this video as very much a sequel video to my season 1 retrospective, to where there are a lot of basic concepts and explanations for why things are a certain way that, again, I'm not going to regurgitate here. So if you want to know the full context behind some of the things I'm talking about in this video, again, I do recommend watching my season 1 retrospective. But again, here we're going to be talking about the entirety of season 2, going through episode by episode. So let's start off with episode 1, The Mutiny, part 1, which obviously ends up being a massive episode for the Power Rangers franchise, the premiere of season 2, after a very successful season 1, where at this point Power Rangers was the biggest kids show at the time, with season 2 here really continuing off of that popularity. I mean, this episode premiered in prime time, something very rare for a kids show, and you can instantly tell the increased budget and the increased scale of the show as well. Again, we have the opening scene taking place in a motor marathon in a field filled with ATVs. Again, something you would never see in season 1, which mostly took place in the same locations. We also get an introduction to obviously a new threat here, to where Rita's superior, the true emperor, Lord Zed, has returned, as being the first appearance of Lord Zed, who is an iconic villain for the Power Rangers franchise at this point, someone that is still being brought back in the modern day for whatever reason. But again, this very menacing villain that really just kind of changes the tone of the show. But here he tells them to prepare the palace for his return, aka changing up the set to explain the later use of American footage that looks nothing like the original set from the Japanese version, where obviously this season, again, with the increased budget, does also use an increased amount of American footage, which a lot of that does stem from a lot of production decisions made from this season that, again, necessitated the usage of more American footage. Again, the creation of Zed here being an exclusive character to American audiences, one that was exclusively made for Power Rangers. So through that, obviously every time he appears, it has to be in American footage. We also have the decision to keep the Jew Ranger suits for the Rangers themselves, to where a lot of this season ends up utilizing footage from Die Ranger, the Super Sentai series that took place after Jew Ranger, which ends up being utilized for the footage of the monsters themselves and also the Megazord footage, while the Rangers themselves are still in the Jew Ranger suits, which obviously is there to keep with the popularity of season 1, to not be this radical departure from season 1, though ends up being a decision that ends up leading to a lot of production issues along the way. To where, while this is very cool in concept to see Power Rangers changing up the formula and not just simply using the Sentai footage as it was initially intended and having to be more creative with it, it does also lead to a lot of the footage having to be spliced, to where we cut back and forth between the Rangers and the monsters who are never in the same shot, as again, there isn't original Sentai footage of them in the same shot. So through that, you get very few hand-to-hand combat fights between the Rangers and the monsters on this season, and it also leads to a lot of spliced Megazord footage as well, which is extremely underwhelming. But again, through this introduction, Lord Zed ends up coming off as extremely menacing. His theme having this dark, grim tone to it, him having a snake that turns into his staff, so again, he comes off as a much darker threat than the likes of Rita, who always came off as this more comical villain. However, he was so menacing to the point where parents complained about him, and through that, he eventually gets toned down, which is, again, a bit underwhelming. Though again, at least in the first half of the season, he does come off as a pretty formidable foe, obviously instantly being set up here as Rita's superior, and through that bolstering his threat level, along with him actually banishing Rita back to her dumpster and sending her off into space. again, showing him defeat the last season's antagonist in a single swoop. Also through this, Zed ends up revealing that he has his own army of putties, an army of putties that are stronger than Rita's, with them having vests on with a Z in the center. Again, them being set up as this big threat here, despite the fact that the Z on their chest is a weak spot, which is stupid, as why would you put a weak spot like that on them to where once they're hit, they instantly explode, which and all that is ridiculous. But this does lead to the Rangers ending up fighting the putties in American morphed footage, which was a rarity in season 1, as I do not believe that they had a lot of the Jew Ranger suits at that time, though obviously now they have a lot more of them to utilize. Though again, due to the fact that these Z putties didn't exist in Jew Ranger, it does mean that all of the putty fights in this season end up taking place in American footage, which also leads to a dumb trend on this season that occurs due to the decision of, again, keeping the Jew Ranger suits, and that you almost never see the Rangers fighting against the monsters themselves, especially after the initial batch of episodes here, where again, they have the splice in between Die Ranger footage and American footage. So through that, instead, to compensate for the lack of hand-to-hand combat with monsters, we instead get a billion fights with putties on this season, with the monster always just showing up just to release putties on the Rangers, which again leads to a lot of these episodes feeling very repetitive in their episode structure, with every episode having a really extended putty fight that just gets really stale. But through this fight, we do end up seeing Bulk and Skull watching it, leading to the start of their storyline across this season of them trying to find out the identity of the Power Rangers. Again, this nice little subplot for them that does lead to some nice moments for their development along the way, though also doesn't really culminate in anything, which is a bit underwhelming. But eventually, Zed ends up creating a monster, Piranha's head. The Rangers end up fighting in Jew 2 footage, with Tommy staying behind because of Jew 2 footage, where again, the beginning of this season does end up using the leftover Jew 2 footage that wasn't used in season 1, which obviously makes sense as why spend all the money in creating that footage just to not use it. But it does also end up leading to, again, a lot of splicing in the Megazord footage, or instead they have to make it seem like it's fighting against the Thunder Megazord instead, which does lead to some sloppiness, as we'll talk about. Anyway, the episode does end with the Rangers calling on their Zords, only for the monster to be able to freeze them somehow. Only for us to get to part 2, where it turns out the Tyrannosaurus made it through because of Jew 2 footage, though the monster is able to turn it against the Rangers, meaning that they now need Dragon Zord. So Zordon ends up strengthening Tommy's powers, only for Piranha's head to take over Dragon Zord 2, which makes you question why even add this, as it's just wasting time on the show, which is really a lot of the season. This is when Zordon says that they now need stronger Zords, new Zords with the power of thunder, I guess. Again, never really explained where these powers came from. And to show these off, they end up just showing Die Ranger footage of the Zords. So that's something. Anyway, Billy ends up talking about building a device to undo Zed's signal on the Zords, because, again, that was a trope used in the Jew 2 footage. With it also being revealed that the new Zords cannot be activated until they get control of the old Zords again. Which makes you question, why are you mentioning the new Zords then if we can't use them now anyway? Anyway, we get to part 3 of the Mutiny, where we finally get our new intro for the season. It obviously replaces Rita with Zed and includes some new footage, though here we do see the Zords attacking the charity event, only for no one to get hurt anyway. Also, we see Billy finishing his device, only for it to not work right away because he put the battery upside down, I guess. Anyway, we see them get the Zords back, only for Zed to instantly create a crater that they fall through, literally utilizing the exact same footage we've seen over and over again from Jew Ranger during season 1, and proceeds to throw a bomb at Piranha's head, which is the way that he grows monsters on this season, which is a strange way to do it, though again, it is directly taken from Die Ranger. But this is where Zordon reveals that he's saved enough of the old Zords to now make the new Zords, I guess. Or we also get the reveal that Tommy's powers are too weak to power a Zord, mainly because he just doesn't have a Die Ranger counterpart yet. This does lead to our first Thunder Zord call sequence, which is essentially just reused footage from Green with Evil, mixed with some actual new American footage here of the old Dino Zords transforming into the Thunder Zords, which is actually a pretty cool aesthetic there. And I do really like the Thunder Zords. I mean, the Red Dragon Zord ends up having a warrior mode, which does lead to plenty of individual fights with it, while the Thunder Megazord ends up essentially being the Red Dragon Zord using the other Zords as armor, which I think is a cool concept here. Now again, the Megazord fights themselves are a bit underwhelming though, especially early on in the season, with it again just being a mixing of the Die Ranger footage with the Thunder Megazord and the Ju 2 monster footage, where again there is some sloppiness of you being able to see the OG Megazord in some shots, though they do end up creating some original cockpit footage for a Thunder Megazord, though I'm pretty sure it's the exact same few shots used over and over again across the season. And it is strange how like we do instantly see the Megazord struggling in its first battle here, which we even like have Tommy exclaiming that, oh, these Zords are amazing, which is like, what makes you say that? They're barely even able to destroy the monster here. So again, all that's pretty strange. But with that, we get to episode 4, the Wannabe Ranger, the first true filler episode of the season, to where Zordon reveals that he's going to be offline for a short time due to galactic imbalance from the linear alignment in planets, because I guess that's a thing, to where Alpha decides during this time to be a hero himself and not call on the Rangers to save a kid, only for the monster of the day to activate his self-destruct program, which I guess is something that you can easily do. But really the core of the episode itself ends up being a pretty typical trope of the monster being able to shapeshift and the Rangers having to figure out which one's the real Ranger, and all that's pretty mundane. Episode 5, Putty on the Brain, involves Zed putting a spell on Zach's sunglasses to make anyone that wears them see the other Rangers as putties, which again makes you question, why didn't he just make it so they see everybody as putties? Why is it just the Rangers? But anyway, we see them eventually figure out that, oh, we could just morph, and that nullifies the effects of the spell anyway, to where it really feels like this was all just kind of an excuse to add more putty fights to their show. We get Bloom of Doom, an episode where there's a club fair where no one ends up signing up for Kimberly's club while everyone joins Trini's, to which Zed ends up creating a plan to make her jealous of Trini, with Kim then acting out of character and people for some reason not instantly recognizing that this is all a plan from Zed, though Trini ends up being the one to rescue her from the spell because her daggers can break the spell, I guess. And it all turns out that the people that wanted to be in Kim's club all went to the wrong location, I guess. So we get a happy ending, I guess. But eventually we get to episode 7, The Green Dream. An interesting episode here, as it is essentially the start of the Green No More arc. This arc that follows around Tommy and chronicles him losing his powers for good, really being the first overarching storyline in the show up to this point that takes place outside of a multi-parter. Again, I do think it's a step in the right direction. It shows the show trying to become more serialized and taking that extra step that I wanted from the series after season 1, even though the episode itself is kind of dumb, as it does have Zed wanting to steal the Sword of Power, this sword that can only be called when the Rangers are gathered, I guess. It's literally never mentioned again. I believe in the original script it was actually going to be the Sword of Darkness, the sword that Tommy used when he was evil in Green with Evil, and that would have been a pretty cool callback and a pretty impactful one, though again they just decided not to go through with it. And here we do see Tommy being kidnapped and turn evil, only for that to all be resolved by the end of the episode anyway, though the episode does end with a somber tone as Tommy realizes that his powers are almost depleted, which ends up being a trend for the next few episodes, to where they all end up having a pretty major focus on Tommy losing his powers, though they all don't really progress the arc that much until the actual Green No More 2-parter, with every episode up to that point essentially being a glorified filler episode, but they all do at least focus around the same concept, which again is rare for Power Rangers. But again, they all do largely revolve around Tommy's struggle with him losing his powers, which again is rare for Power Rangers up to this point to have that level of serialization. But again, a lot of the following episodes are not super notable. I mean, the Power Stealer ends up being an episode where the Rangers are doing a cleanup club, and we have Billy creating a mirror to distract the monster who is attracted to himself, and that distracts him enough for them to defeat him, which is strange. Though, an interesting aspect of this episode is that we actually do get American Megazord footage, to where the sense I get here is the fact that the Ju 2 Megazord footage was probably a bit hard to work around, to where we actually, again, get American footage of the monster landing some blows on the Thunder Megazord, which is, again, such a rarity in Power Rangers to see them actually attempt to recreate Megazord footage, as it is the hardest footage to recreate. And again, for them to go out of their way to create some original shots of the Thunder Megazord in close combat was, again, surprising to see here. Those episode does culminate in a notable moment to me of Bulk and Skull having gotten footage of the Rangers morphing, and they're about to show it off to the entire youth center, only for the Rangers to switch out the tapes at the last second and then proceed to mock Bulk and Skull, which kind of shows the Rangers as dicks there. But anyway, we get to episode 9, the Beetle Invasion, where you have Ernie wanting the Rangers to play in a game of broom ball against Stone Canyon, a nearby town. That will be slightly more relevant to a future storyline. But also through this episode, we get the introduction to Richie, who might be one of the most bland Power Rangers of all time, though he's introduced here to be a love interest for Trini, along with also being a red herring for the identity of the White Ranger down the road. Though really by the end of it, he doesn't really serve much of a purpose on the show, considering his storyline with Trini gets dropped when she eventually leaves the show. And through that, again, he just ends up being a mostly forgettable character here. But the monster of this episode does end up absorbing more of Tommy's powers, because they obviously make it even more clear that his powers are almost drained, taking us to Welcome to Venus Island. The Rangers are having a beach day, only for Goldar to kidnap a little girl that was with the Rangers, who never shows up again. But they end up holding her ransom for the Green Ranger, to where the Rangers go to Venus Island, which is essentially just a beach with weird plants on it. And they do also talk about how, like, oh, Venus Island can only appear when Zed raises it. I guess that's a thing. But here we have most of the Rangers being captured and Tommy saving the day and rescuing the girl, along with them also just openly saying Tommy's name in front of the girl while morphed, which happens constantly on this season, where it is strange that they don't bother to have the Rangers hiding their identities better. But anyway, we then get to the Song of Guitardo, a filler episode that I actually really like here. And it's an episode that does definitely hit a lot harder nowadays than it would have at the time of the show airing, but it involves Kim wanting Zach's help in writing a song, with this episode really showcasing Amy Jo Johnson's singing chops. But again, it's another one of these episodes where Tommy ends up saving the day despite his powers almost being drained. And we do culminate the episode with this really emotional moment of Kimberly singing the song, a song that ends up playing at the end of Once and Always. And again, a song that just feels like it has a deeper meaning nowadays. One where, again, it isn't even emotional at the time, as, again, Tommy is talking about how, oh, it's hard to say goodbye, with him at the time obviously meaning about him losing his powers and not being able to be part of the Rangers anymore. So again, we have them holding their hands and saying forever, which again is just sad. Obviously sad from the passing of True Chang and Jason David Frank, which is obviously what made it very emotional at the end of Once and Always, but also even just sad in the fact that this is one of the last few episodes that has the full original cast together here, where literally half of this cast leaves the show in just a few episodes, which makes a lot of this even more tragic. But either way, with that, we then finally get to Green No More Part 1, where the Green Ranger storyline finally culminates, where we do start off with Tommy and Kim talking about him losing his powers, along with seeing a hologram of Tommy from the future who tells him to remember his communicator. So I wonder if that'll be relevant. Along with this, Zach's cousin Curtis gets introduced to the show, with him becoming friends with Richie, and also ends up just serving a similar role to Richie of being this red herring for the eventual White Ranger's identity. But also in this episode, we see a group of 5 bullies being introduced to the show. They're clearly there to mirror the Rangers, where their portrayal is extremely over the top, to where they literally say Angel Grove will belong to us, because that's something that bullies say. But anyway, Zed obviously wants to turn them into his own Rangers, the Dark Rangers. But first we have to have Tommy utilizing his powers for the last time, to where Zordon even tells him that this is going to be your one last fight, and Tommy deciding to go through with it anyway. Which, with that, I should also mention the fact that this is also the last episode that includes Ju2 footage, where after Green No More, they end up transitioning to the Die Ranger footage for the rest of the season. But finally, we get a bizarre Megazord fight here of the Dragon Zord being called and it fighting against the monster in G2 footage, all while the Thunder Megazord is also fighting against the monster in Die Ranger footage, meaning that we get this like close-up hand-to-hand Megazord fight between the monster and the Dragon Zord, all while the Thunder Zord's just there at a distance. But anyway, the Rangers are defeated, as you would expect from a two-parter, though for some reason the monster doesn't finish them off, and instead teleports Tommy away to fight him on his own, because I guess that was more important, where his powers finally give out. To which, what do you know? He looks exactly like he looked at in the hologram from the future. I wonder if that's gonna go full circle soon. But also along the way, the other Rangers end up being captured by Lord Zed, taken to the other world, aka a cave that just looks like the exterior of Angel Grove. Anyway, the episode does end with the reveal of the Dark Rangers, who look really stupid, as it just looks like they're wearing a knockoff Power Rangers Halloween costume. That takes us to Green No More Part 2, where Tommy ends up fighting against Goldar without his powers, where Goldar says, "I want you to say that you're my superior," only for Tommy to say, "You are out of your mind," and proceeds to jump and punch him afterwards and steal his device, which he uses to make the message to the past, and in turn getting his communicator immediately after asking it, which makes no sense, as there's no world where that's the way that time travel works, but whatever. Tommy ends up obviously saving the day by teleporting to Zed's dimension and rescues the Rangers and destroys the power source of the Dark Rangers, who never even got to use their powers. And when the Thunder Megazord is defeated, we see Tommy being able to destroy the monster himself by getting eaten by it and blasting it from the inside, I guess. I guess that's a strategy that was deemed the most effective here. I mean, overall, like a pretty nice fitting final conflict for Tommy to conclude here, where again, it does feel like this solid final battle for the Green Ranger, with him really saving the day in this instance. But it's following this where we hear talk about how they're gonna miss him while he's on school break, for whatever that means. I mean, really it's just an excuse to write him off the show for the next few episodes, add more suspense of who the eventual White Ranger's gonna be. But with that, it does take us to one of my favorite episodes of the season in Missing Green, the only Jason focused episode of the season, though again a really strong one that does show Jason's guilt over Tommy having lost his powers, calling back to the events of the Green Candle in the previous season, again showing more continuity within the series, something that again wasn't focused on early on. I also like that it just outright shows the Rangers as this like true group of friends, with the others trying to find Tommy to help cheer Jason up, though obviously they end up being captured instead, to which this allows for a similar situation to occur as what happened in the Green Candle, where Goldar ends up creating candles for each of the other Rangers, which I guess is just a thing he can do, and Jason obviously has to now save their powers, ends up getting redemption by doing so here. Though it is funny that there's a point in the episode where Jason's told that he has to make a difficult decision, as his friends can lose their powers, only for it to turn out that he has to defeat the monster to even get to his friends to begin with. So it's again like, what choice is there here? But again, this is the first episode to utilize Die Ranger footage outside the Megazord fights, so they're allowing for actual Megazord fights now that the monsters and the Megazords come from the same Sentai series. Though this also ends up being the first episode where you notice the absence of Jason, Trini, and Zach. Again, for reasons that we'll later talk about, but here you do notice that while they are there for the in-person scenes, they have clearly already left before recording the ADR, meaning that Jason doesn't sound like Jason here when more. And we also have Trini and Zach just outright not given many lines here. So again, at this point, they essentially just get other random voice actors to voice the Rangers here. Jason being given this really generic gruff voice, while it didn't even seem like they even bothered to try to get an actress to sound anything like Trini, which is just funny in how lazy they were there. But it's also funny that at the end of this episode, Jason is told that he's shown himself to be a formidable leader, just to not be a leader pretty soon afterwards. And also the episode ends with Tommy writing a letter to Jason, telling him to not blame himself for what happened to him, which again is a nice character moment there. And this is all done while Tommy is wearing white, which I wonder if that'll be relevant. But it takes us to episode 15, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Park. Obviously a filler episode, being the final Zach-focused episode, with it revolving around his relationship with Curtis, who he claims blows one of the meanest horns you ever heard. Though obviously Zed ends up putting a spell on his trumpet that brainwashes people, because again, we definitely didn't have enough of that on this season. But it does cause the Rangers to hallucinate, meaning that they have to fight against monsters from their past, aka Ju-2 monsters, because those are the monsters they had the suits for, which again happens over and over again on this season. But again, as a whole, mostly bland episode. We then get Beauty and the Beast, a Kim-focused episode with her going to a fortune teller to try to get info about Tommy, I guess. That's the thing you do. This leads to her getting kidnapped by Zed, because Zed has now decided that he thinks Kim would be a perfect queen for him for some reason, leading to her awakening wearing Rita's outfit, which I guess is foreshadowing. But it does lead to her getting out of this situation by doing a humorous Rita impersonation, which is probably the most notable moment of the episode. But with that, we then get to one of the more notable episodes of the season in White Light Part 1. Being a two-parter here that I do have a lot of nostalgia for, obviously it being the episode where the White Ranger gets introduced, though it's also an episode that is actually kind of dumb when you really think about it. But anyway, it does start with Kim revealing that Tommy is coming back at the end of the week. While Alpha and Zordon decide to go on a secret mission and end up powering down the entire command center for some reason without even telling the Rangers. Again, for some reason. Oh, this is pretty stupid. Through this, Zed ends up detecting that Zordon is gone somehow, especially considering he isn't gone. He's literally still there in the command center. And again, I really don't get why doing this secret mission ends up leading to Zordon not being able to monitor what's going on outside. But either way, Zed ends up deciding that now is the time to take the Green Ranger's powers, which again, he doesn't even do. And I don't even get why he wants to, as they're already diminished. And I guess he can restore them. But again, like, what's so special about them at this point? But anyway, this leads to us seeing Tommy getting teleported with the implication that Zed has captured him, though obviously that's not the case. But it's also here where you see Rita's dumpster arriving on Earth somehow. Again, I don't know how, considering she was thrown into the middle of space, but whatever. I mean, we do see Bulk and Skull finding her here, which ends up being their subplot for the two-parter. While the Rangers themselves end up fighting against Nimrod, the Scarlet Sentinel, in what is a strange splice fight sequence, which, I mean, again, obviously are pretty common in the Zord fights, though. And this ends up occurring in the on foot fight, which just felt very bizarre there. But anyway, the episode does end with Billy finding a secret door in the command center and ends up seeing Alpha and Zordon working on a White Ranger, taking us to White Light Part 2, where Billy ends up telling the others about this new Ranger, to which Kim is disappointed that someone's going to be replacing Tommy, which I don't get how that's her initial thought, as wouldn't you at least consider the concept that it is Tommy, considering you haven't seen him for a bit, but whatever. Zordon appears to reveal to the Rangers the newest member of their team, talking about creating a more powerful Ranger to take on Zed, with the White Ranger coming in from the roof with white light shining on him, where that Ranger ends up taking off his helmet to reveal his identity, with it obviously being Tommy. A very obvious decision from a production standpoint in my mind to reintroduce Tommy to the show here, where again, just Tommy was still the most popular character on the show, and just to fully write him out of the show does seem ridiculous, though that supposedly was actually originally the plan, where again, initially Tommy was going to be leaving the show, with Jason David Frank getting his own other tokusatsu show in Cybertron, the show that would later become VR Troopers, with Brad Hawkins, the person who later starred in VR Troopers, being the person that was meant to be replacing Tommy as the White Ranger here, which obviously would have been very jarring, especially considering the red herrings in Richie and Curtis, only for it to be an entirely different new character. Now, obviously, I assume they would have handled this entire situation very differently had the plan been to pick a new character to be the White Ranger, but still, I do think at the end of the day, they definitely made the right call here in picking Tommy, where obviously through his more prolonged tenure with the series, it ends up obviously making him an icon for the franchise, with him to this day being the most notable Ranger of the bunch. But it is when this is revealed that Kim ends up passing out, to where he ends up waking her up, which is a nice moment for their relationship. But this is where Zordon then declares that he is now the new leader of the power team, a line that was very clearly put there in post, as again, at the time this originally aired, Austin St. John had already left the show, where obviously this line was added here to be this more natural transition of leadership between the two, though again, it does feel like a bit of an abrupt addition to the episode. Though obviously with context, it obviously makes sense that they would pick Tommy to be the leader over the likes of Rocky or Billy or Kim, especially with these like claims that he's the most powerful Ranger, and again, just considering the popularity of Tommy, it just made all sense in the world to actually make him the leader at this point. Though with obviously the inclusion of the White Ranger here does allow for them to utilize more Die Ranger footage, with Tommy now having a direct Sentai counterpart, and that being the 6th Ranger in Die Ranger, though that Ranger was still a pretty underutilized character in the show, where there wasn't that much footage of him fighting on his own, to where still most of the White Ranger footage on this season does end up being American footage, and really the Die Ranger footage that there was still kind of strange, where the original character was actually a kid that grew when he morphed, and through that does lead to Tommy's character kind of changing when he morphs, to where he has this more OTT energy and overconfidence that and just isn't really consistent with his character. Now with that, I should also mention the fact that Tommy is also given a sword called Saba that has a talking tiger on it, which ends up guiding him at points, though realistically it's kind of a superfluous addition that's simply just there due to Sentai footage. Doesn't really have any significance on the season. But again, Tommy does go on to fight Nimrod in his Tiger Zord, with his new theme song playing, White Ranger Tiger Power, to which it is strange the fact that Tommy's first fight here with his Tiger Zord ends up being one where he does instantly struggle and is ultimately defeated on his own, to where he does need the call for the help from the other Rangers to form the Mega Tiger Zord to defeat Nimrod, which is essentially a Zord formation that's very similar to the Dragon Zord battle mode of mixing the Tiger Zord with the Thunder Zords outside of the Red Dragon Zord, which again, it's also strange that this is a formation introduced in the Tiger Zord's initial outing, which again just kind of makes the Tiger Zord feel a bit weak here. But anyway, the episode does end with Rita escaping her dumpster, only for the Rangers to recapture her anyway and also send her back into space, which makes you question, why was this even part of the episode? But with that, we get to the episode 2 for 1, which for me is really where the season starts to go downhill. Where up to this point, I do feel like the season was actually pretty solid. It felt like a steady progression of season 1, really up to the same quality for the most part, though having some minor improvements outside of the obvious splicing of fight footage. That obviously was necessary due to the initial decision to not go all in on shifting the Die Ranger footage. But from this point on, I do feel like the season just kind of goes off the rails, with the rest of the season just being mostly bad with few glimmers of decentness alongside it. And really, it's not for a singular reason. It just feels like a mixture of numerous production issues that really just compounded on each other by the end. But this episode in particular ends up being a return to filler, though we do get a new intro to include Tommy as the White Ranger, though it's very strange that he's introduced here considering they have to instantly change it after the power transfer. But here we do have Kim and Tommy going on a date, to where Kim brings along her mom's purse that she had on her first date with her dad, which is strange considering her parents are now divorced, so I don't know why she wanted to have this along. But through this, we also get to see Richie finally ask out Trini, only for none of that to matter. And we do get 2 monsters in this episode. That really just felt like an excuse to not have Tommy be involved in the Megazord fight, as the Die Ranger footage didn't utilize Tiger Zord, which is a common occurrence on this season, to where despite the fact that Tommy is there, they do constantly have to create excuses for why the Tiger Zord is involved in the Megazord fight, which usually involves Tommy having to do a fight on his own. But again, as a whole though, this was a mostly bland episode, but it does take us to Opposites Attract, a Billy focused episode with us getting another Billy love interest that never shows up again. Though Billy does get a solo fight against Goldar, which is a pretty badass moment for him. Though this episode does end up containing the last time that Jason leads a morphing sequence, as Tommy will from this point forward, with this episode being the last episode to film before the decision to make Tommy the new leader was made, in essence also being the last episode to contain Jason, Zach, and Trini appearing in person in new footage, which I guess through that we should talk about the entire situation revolving their actors in Austin St. John, Walter Jones, and True Trang, to where, again, they do not appear on this season beyond this point, due to the fact that they decide to walk off set mid-season, largely due to the terrible working conditions and low pay that were involved in filming Power Rangers, where, again, Power Rangers is notoriously a really cheap show, as again you could just tell by the initial premise of the show, where half the footage comes from stock footage from a Japanese show, to where mixing down the fact that Power Rangers was also just a non-union show as well. It really just allowed for Saban to get away with some terrible practices during the early days of the show, to where for the actors on this show, again, despite this being one of the most profitable kids shows of all time and being such a massive success at the time, the actors themselves were paid really the bare minimum, a measly $600 a week. Again, not much better than minimum wage. And to add to that, the work conditions were just terrible. Again, they filmed long days with minimal breaks. They had to film multiple episodes over the course of a single week. And again, it's still a very physically intensive show that had unmorphed fight sequences that required a lot of choreography, and there were also many reports on set of major safety violations. And again, just straight up, working as an actor on this show would have just sucked. To where outside of your name now being known to kids around the world, they still had to struggle through these really terrible working conditions with some pretty terrible pay as well. To where, because of that, even coming into this season, Austin St. John had been pretty open in the fact that had things not changed, that he would be leaving the show. They obviously stayed on board early on in the season in the hope that they would relent, which they obviously didn't. To where by the time of this point in the season, it did seem like the entire cast was going to strike. in an attempt to obviously get better working conditions, as they should, only for Austin to only be joined by Walter Jones and Troy Trang, who end up walking off set alongside him, only for Jason David Frank alongside Amy Jo Johnson and David Yost, obviously the actors for Tommy, Kimberly, and Billy, to stay with the show, which essentially guaranteed that the demands of the other actors would not be met, as they really have no incentive to cater to those other three when three people are still on board with them. Which I do think it would have been interesting to see had the others actually went through with striking as well, putting Saban in this really sticky situation of potentially losing their entire main cast. So again, you would think at that point they would relent a bit, but you never really know of how cheap Saban was. Though, from what I understand, I do believe the three actors that did stay with the show were eventually given raises, though I suspect the working conditions were not any better. Though again, this is a situation where I fully understand why the three that left did leave. I feel like it's a situation that is fully understandable, though it does do severe harm to the season, as it should. I mean, that's kind of the point of them doing it, is them knowing that it would harm the show, and through that, again, hope that it would lead to Saban relenting and giving them what they want, only for Saban to just not do that and instead go through with having a pretty botched middle section to this season, where they still continue to produce a bevy of episodes here without having three of the main cast even on the show. Obviously putting the show in a pretty precarious position of having to find replacements immediately to try to get the show back on track, while also having to set up storylines around the new characters that are going to replace them, along with the fact that they have to explain why those characters left the show to begin with, which to me really brings this season to a halt here, where it felt like all the momentum that was building up through the Green No More arc and the White Light ends up being halted at this point in an attempt to obviously recover from all these production missteps that the studio made. Where alongside the departure of Jack, Zach, and Trini, we do also see Curtis and Richie being cut from the show as well, something that I do find a bit strange, as it does make me question why didn't they just make them two of the new Rangers, especially considering how they had already been foreshadowing that they were going to become Rangers at some point, with them obviously have these red herrings to becoming the White Ranger. Now, I'm not saying that it's what I would have actually preferred, as again, I don't find them to be the most riveting characters in the world, though it is something that you would assume that they would have at least attempted, considering it would have been a relatively easy solution here. Though I do also feel like they also got a bit fortunate at who did decide to stay on the show, where straight up, while I do like characters like Jason and Zach, and again, Trini's fine, they really didn't have much to do on this season up to this point. Even before they end up being written off the show, it really didn't feel like those three characters had much development throughout really any of the season, outside of Jason and Missing Green, whereas many of those characters didn't have much to do. Well, obviously Tommy and Kimberly were given major focuses on this season, and Billy himself was definitely one of the more integral characters over the likes of Zach and Trini, to where, again, it does feel pretty fortunate that they were able to keep three of the bigger characters here, though obviously it is just sad that this is the way that it had to play out. And again, fully blaming this on Saban. I do not blame the actors in any way. It's just sad that by the midway point in season 2, only 2 of the original Rangers are still on the show. And obviously with Kim leaving by the end of season 3 as well, it does make it strange that despite how iconic the first season of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is, only one of the Rangers from that season ends up actually making it throughout the entire series' run. By the way, following this, we get to episode 21, Zed's Monster Mash, the first episode after the actors for Jason, Zach, and Trini had left. And you can immediately tell, with Tommy, Billy, and Kim being the only Rangers to appear unmorphed through this episode, to where they also mention an upcoming peace conference. Talk about what would happen if one of the Rangers got picked for it, which is obviously clear foreshadowing there, especially considering the fact that it's constantly mentioned across the next few episodes. But really, this episode ends up being a Halloween episode, and a strange one at that, really feeling like true filler here. It was made just to buy time before they got replacements. The Rangers fighting against old Ju2 monsters again, and us having more Splice Megazord footage. But it does eventually take us to the Ninja Encounter Part 1, a 3-parter that sucks. To where outside of introducing the new characters that will later become Rangers, these episodes really just feel like them just meandering around with very little of substance happening here, and them just dragging out almost every sequence just to fill out the schedule. Or again, this batch of episodes to me is just straight up boring. The episode does start with the Rangers in the park, to where we get shots of the Rangers all together, with a lot of it coming from archive footage, where I will also say from this point until the power transfer, Tommy Tommy is usually wearing green, even in new scenes here, so that he can match up with some archive footage, which is pretty stupid, allowing them to use like old command center footage and pretend like the other Rangers were there the entire time, which is pretty dumb. But here we do hear them talk about a ninja competition and that 3 from Stone Canyon are participating, with us conveniently getting introduced to a group of 3 friends from Stone Canyon. How convenient. But we see them having a conversation with a father who is there with his kid in a stroller, only for that stroller to start rolling down the hill, leading to one of the dumbest scenes in Power Rangers history of this new friend group alongside the Rangers all chasing this stroller for a good chunk of the episode, which is so ridiculous. Just see no one helping to stop this stroller and people like legitimately just jumping out of the way of it, which is really stupid. But it does provide for some decent content for Bulk and Skull, with them being the only people here outside of the Rangers to go out of their way to help here. But the Stone Canyon trio and the Rangers end up stopping the stroller at the same time. So we get introduced to this new trio in Rocky, Aisha, and Adam, who are all here for the ninja tournament, which makes you question, how did the Rangers not instantly piece together that, oh, they're the ones participating in it, as we do see them shocked when it gets revealed that they were the ones that were in the tournament, which is so stupid. Which I should also mention that the tournament itself was really boring on the show, really being dragged out fights with no stakes to them, of these new characters being dressed up as ninjas the entire time, which is also still dumb. But obviously a lot of this episode is setting these 3 characters up as being equals to the Rangers, to where it makes it pretty apparent what their role on the season is going to end up being. Though the episode does end with Zed capturing this trio as he wants to turn them against the Rangers, but he also ends up capturing the dad of the kid from earlier as well for some reason, where this leads to Bulk and Skull having to take care of the baby for the remainder of the 3-parter, which is lame. But anyway, we get to part 2 where Zed releases a monster that Jason, Zach, and Trini fight, only for them to be frozen instantly and essentially written out of the episode, all while the other 3 are more focused on saving the Stone Canyon trio, only for them to be called away to fight the monster. To which this episode ends with the trio still being captured. So essentially meaning that almost no progress was made in this episode. Taking us to part 3, where the Rangers are able to unfreeze the other Rangers, leading to us then getting the same sequence of putty fights and fighting the same monster again. Though eventually the Stone Canyon trio are able to escape and help the Rangers fight against putties, which is kind of surreal to see here, this group of non-Rangers fighting against the putties here and being pretty effective. Though it does lead to this dumb sequence of Billy having to take off his helmet for contrived reasons, to where this is also that he has to reveal his identity to the trio. So where we literally end this 3-parter with this group still not becoming Rangers yet, because we obviously need to have more filler content. Taking us to a monster of global proportions, where the Stone Canyon trio are now hanging out with the Rangers for some reason, even though they're supposed to be from a different town. But it's also here where Billy is hosting an event about global problems, where they end up being visited by some international students that, what do you know, they end up being captured. And also, it's very strange that this is not directly connected to the Peace Conference, as it's pretty much the same thing. But really, for me, this episode just ends up coming off extremely lazy, where they don't even try to bother explaining why Jason, Zach, and Trini are not in the picture in this episode. And the episode does culminate in Alpha just giving the Rangers toward the shuttle Zord, which really just comes out of nowhere and is also finally reintroduced in future episodes. Just such a Power Ranger thing to do. And really just Tor ends up being a really irrelevant part of their arsenal, simply just being there due to Sentai footage and obviously the Cell toys, where obviously we do see them form the Thunder Megazord with it, though it's a formation I've always found to be really lame, where it's literally just the other Zords standing on top of Tor as they all blast the monster at once, which is just kind of a lackluster way to defeat the enemies there. But anyway, with that, we get another filler episode in Zed Waves, which revolves around a monster that can control people's minds, because again, that definitely doesn't happen enough on this season. But here we have everyone chanting "Hail Lord Zed," and it is funny that we actually get some footage of Zach, Trini, and Jason in this episode, which comes from unused footage from the Something Fishy episode, where they pretend pretend like they're still on the show, only for them to morph and be instantly taken under the spell. With the other Rangers also falling under the spell, it does lead to the Stone Canyon trio ending up saving the day, once again showing why they are worthy of becoming Rangers, which takes us to our next two-parter, the power transfer. The episode starts with the reveal that 3 teens have been picked for the Peace Conference, with it obviously being Jason, Zach, and Trini. Which, I mean, straight up, this is a really dumb way to write them out of the show. As, again, like, it's literally a peace conference. I mean, how long is this really going to take? And why would this stop them from being Rangers when you could just teleport anywhere in the world in seconds? So again, this just felt like a ridiculous way to explain their disappearance from the show. We do get this funny scene of Tommy, Kim, and Billy telling the others that they got picked, which we can only see their silhouettes, which is just ridiculous. But with that, we do get talk about needing 3 new Rangers, that we need to do a power transfer, to which, conveniently, at the same time, we find out that the Stone Canyon trio have ended up transferring to Angel Grove High. So I wonder what's going to happen here. But Zordon ends up telling the Rangers that to do the power transfer, they have to travel to a deserted planet and get the Sword of Light, another dumb MacGuffin that only appears in this one batch of episodes, but it's claimed that this is the only thing that can transfer powers, which makes no sense as this is done literally in the following season without it. And again, this is where we are reintroduced to Tor, alongside also being introduced to Serpentera, obviously Lord Zed's personal Zord, which in the Sentai was actually a god, and the scale of the Zord obviously certainly matches that, being one of the biggest Zords we see in the show's history, and also being one proven to be extremely powerful. The interesting aspect of it is that the show does proclaim that it does have a weakness of having a short battery life, which ends up explaining why it never is able to finish the job on the Rangers, when obviously in the original Sentai it was because it was God that was not necessarily against the Rangers. Anyway, we see the Rangers finding a deserted city where the sword is supposed to be, only for Serpentera to attack them in Sentai footage that is essentially just the same footage we see multiple times of Serpentera, just with a red filter over it to make it look like it's on another planet. And this is all while the Stone Canyon trio end up fighting some putties back on Earth, only to for some reason be defeated, despite them having defeated many putties in the past. So again, that was a bit strange. But the episode does end with Serpentera destroying the entire deserted planet that the Rangers are on, which, I mean, to be fair, again, does certainly show off the threat that Serpentera is, but also it's, again, just strange that we hit this cliffhanger here of us assuming that the Rangers were destroyed in the process, only for us to get to part 2, where it turns out that they got the sword at the last second, were teleported right on time, because obviously. But here we obviously see Aisha, Rocky, and Adam being announced as the Rangers, and we see the ceremony, the transfer to powers, which is done in like 10 seconds. Zordon ends up thanking the departed Rangers for their service, to where they're still morphed despite having already transferred their powers, which is stupid. And really, it feels like the show just wanted to shove this under the rug. It very much felt like they wanted you to kind of forget at the fact that these were new Rangers, where no time is really spent on showing Rocky, Aisha, or Adam really coming to terms with the fact that they're now Power Rangers, just kind of acting as if nothing happened, where we do see another fight with Serpentera, which is literally them reusing the footage from the previous episode just without the red filter, because that's Power Rangers for you. So again, just as Serpentera is about to defeat him, it runs out of power and has to retreat. A pretty lame ending to this two-parter. But again, with the addition of these new Rangers, I guess I should stop down and talk about them. So as a whole, I mean, these 3 new Rangers here do all come off as pretty likable. I don't feel like any of these 3 characters are characters that I necessarily ever disliked, though they kind of run into the same issues as the original Rangers as well, where again, there is a lack of depth to them. There's very little development for them as characters. They don't really feel like full-fledged 3-dimensional characters. They just feel like goody two-shoes, but again, like, they're still likable at least. But again, I'll run through them individually. We got Rocky, who obviously ends up being the new Red Ranger, who always feels like a Ranger that got the short end of the stick, where obviously he is a Red Ranger, a position that is typically the main character of the show, / the leader of the team. However, obviously Tommy is in that position instead. And Rocky just feels kind of overshadowed throughout a lot of his run, with him just simply not getting that much to do. He doesn't really get that many focus episodes. He doesn't really have that unique of a personality. He simply just kind of there. there. And while, again, he's not particularly unlikable in any way, he simply is not particularly interesting. Next up, we got Adam, who is obviously a new Black Ranger, who ends up being a character that I definitely have grown on over time. I mean, I do think his initial season here is one where he just kind of comes off as a bit meek, kind of being a mix of the Billy and the Jason archetypes, where again, he is obviously good at martial arts, but he definitely has a confidence issue that we do see him deal with over the course of the next few episodes, where it does feel like Adam is the character that gets the most development of the three in this season, though can come off as a bit whiny. And I do feel like as a whole, he's a character that I definitely like a lot more in the seasons to come than how he comes off in season 2. And finally, we got Aisha, the new Yellow Ranger, who I actually really like. Which is funny considering I actually didn't have many opinions of Aisha coming into this rewatch. I feel like I remembered Aisha as simply just being okay. However, I thought she was really fun through my latest rewatch here. I think she's a character that has a lot of spunk. She certainly has a lot more of a personality than Trini, who again just comes off as this generic do-good. I do feel like Aisha is given a bit more to do. Now, again, I do think there is still a lack of focus on her. She doesn't really get that many episodes that primarily revolve around her, though I do think out of the three, even though she's the one that has the shortest run of these three and probably ends up being the least notable character of the three, I do feel like she's the one that pops the most on her first season here. So again, at least there's that. But with the conclusion of the power transfer here, it really does lead to the rest of the season being mostly comprised of filler, where not much really happens that progresses the story of the series, with there literally being only one multi-parter that does so, and even then, that multi-parter is still riddled with a bevy of filler within it. Again, to me, it really does feel like just all the momentum of this season is just continuously sapped. First through the power transfer storyline, had them halt the season due to them needing to force in these half-baked storylines to bring in these new Rangers, but then follow this up with filler episodes that are utilized to get us to know these new characters, obviously giving them their own focus episodes, which again is a necessity for sure, but I do think it definitely slows down the pace of the season again. And then towards the end of the season, we get more complications that continue to halt the progress of the season, where it really feels like the rest of the season doesn't really have much substance to it and doesn't really have that many stakes to it. But again, a large chunk of the next batch of filler episodes do focus on the new characters. We start off Golder's Vice Versa, where it focuses around a dance where the girls have to ask the guys out, leading to Adam being really mopey with him struggling to find a date, and we get Aisha trying to help him find one, only for him to ask out a girl that turns out to be Scorpina, which is kind of funny that they just randomly bring back Scorpina for this one episode, her being played by a completely different actress, and for her to literally never show up again afterwards. Though again, it is a nice callback to bring her back here, though it does lead to them literally using the exact same Megazord footage from season 1 of the same Goldar and Scorpina fight, but now spliced in with Die Ranger footage, which was pretty stupid. We also get Mirror of Regret, another Adam-focused episode, which is strange to have two of them in a row. But this one revolves around Adam teaching a kid in his karate class after he gets bullied by another one of his students, which leads to Adam having to overcome his own self-doubts. And again, this is actually a pretty decent episode for his character, and also ends up introducing the Power Cannon, a pretty useless weapon that's simply there to sell a toy. But that's followed up by When is a Ranger Not a Ranger, which is a even more generic filler episode with really not much intrigue here, as it's really just an episode that revolves around a monster that is able to take away Kim, Tommy, and Billy's memories, and the others have to now save them, which again just feels pretty generic. Though it does lead to some intrigue from the Bulk and Skull storyline, where they actually do find out the Rangers' identities. And we do get this great reaction from them in finding this out, only for their memories to be wiped immediately afterwards anyway. Next up, we got Rocky Just Wants to Have Fun, which is obviously a Rocky-focused episode, and a bizarre one at that, to where Ernie ends up adding a pachinko machine to the juice bar, which 100% Power Rangers would never refer to a pachinko machine if it wasn't for the fact that it was pretty integral to the usage of the Sentai footage. But through that, Rocky ends up being obsessed with playing pachinko to the point where Zed puts a spell on him, leading to some really bizarre bizarre acting from Steve Cardenas here, and him being both over the top and also really stilted at the same time, which was funny. And it's also funny that we culminate this episode with a redo of the fight with Serpentera, utilizing the exact same footage we have seen before. Or again, this is literally the third time they use the exact same footage of Serpentera stepping on Tor, which is really funny. But after that, we get to Lights, Camera, Action, an episode that was initially meant to be the 100th episode of the show, though due to the mix-up in the schedule due to the power transfer episode, this ends up airing as the 93rd episode instead. But it ends up being a pretty surreal episode here, where the Power Rangers end up going on a talk show, which leads to a bit of a clip show aspect to the episode as they talk through their experiences. But here they end up spreading the message that you should stay in school, which is funny considering they're supposed to be teenagers still in school. So it's like, what life experience do they have to even be giving advice to other kids? But really, the rest of the episode outside that ends up being a pretty generic filler episode that all culminates in Jack, Zach, and Trini sending them a message from the peace conference, which I guess is a thing. This leads up to episode 34, where there's smoke, there's fire. Our first Aisha-focused filler episode that has her being picked as the fire safety captain, to where she later becomes really obsessed with her role, ends up being bossy to the other Rangers, and tries to fight the monster herself due to it setting fires, and her thinking that's her responsibility, and obviously her learning her lesson by the end. Again, a pretty standard episode, though a pretty interesting one, because considering Aisha feeling a bit underutilized on the season. We then get to episode 35, Scavenger Hunt, where the Rangers do a scavenger hunt, which was boring. Probably one of the most generic filler episodes of the season that was just pretty dull. I mean, the only thing of note here comes from Bulk and Skull hiring a gypsy that is portrayed in this really over-the-top way that very much felt politically incorrect at this point. But anyway, with that, we get to episode 36, The Great Bukala Escape, a bizarre episode here that revolves around this alien doll that comes to life, with it being powered by a power source that can give Serpentera unlimited power. So we have the Rangers having to escort the Bukala off the planet, and again, all this is just very strange. And while I did find most of the episode pretty boring, it at least was a unique episode at that. We then get to an episode called Forever Friends, a Kim and Aisha focused episode with Aisha's childhood friend ending up being Kim's opponent in a gymnastics competition, where her friend Shauna is kind of a dick and is jealous of Kim, leading to them being captured by Zed together, to where they end up bonding over their parents being divorced, which I actually thought was pretty nice content for Kim's character here, though the episode does culminate in a really long gymnastics performance from the two, which was just kind of boring, and it all leads in them tying, because I guess that's a thing that happens in gymnastics, of them just giving the win to both of them, which was kind of lame. But with that, we get to the next episode called A Real Fish Story, an episode where Rocky is a lifeguard, leading to Zed deciding to create a shark monster alongside reviving all the other fish monsters from the past, which just made me realize how many Chew-2 monsters were based off of fish, where we obviously have the Rangers fight against them, which, I mean, at least it's not a generic putty fight once again, but it does lead to a pretty badass moment of Tommy defeating all of the monsters on his own, though again, it's another one of these instances where it's clearly just done due to the fact that his counterpart wasn't involved in the Sentai footage that was utilized, with the Megazord fight also being a bit strange, and the fact that it was literally footage from the ending of Dire Ranger, which actually took place in the future. So it's kind of strange they end up actually utilizing it here. But then we get to what is essentially the start of the end game of the season, where this is where the season gets a bit disjointed in my mind, where we get to the episode Rangers Back in Time Part 1, an episode that aired 4 months after the previous episode, with there being a mid-season hiatus due to the filming of the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger movie, which I'm sure I'll talk about at some point down the road, but it does lead to another issue that I have with this season, in that due to the fact that the movie was filming at the same time as the ending of this season, along with the movie itself having a lot of production issues in its own right, it does lead to the end of this season just being filled with many multi-part filler episodes that are just simply boring and really stretched out, though technically this isn't one of those, as it was actually filmed before the movie was filmed, actually being filmed around the time of the power transfer. Through that, it just ends up being a just outright bad two-parter with not much justification for it, where this ends up being an episode where Zed decides to spin the Earth backwards to turn back time to have the Rangers be children for some reason. A plan that we literally see him do again in the following season. But through this, we see the child actors being used for Rangers being the same actors that they later utilized in Mighty Morphin Alien Rangers. But again, this entire episode just ends up being extremely illogical, as none of this makes sense. I mean, we literally hear them say that, oh, they're too young to remember that they're Rangers. And okay, that would be fine if it wasn't inconsistent with the fact that how do they know each other then when they literally didn't meet until a few months ago? And also, it's really dumb that we hear Zordon talk about how, oh, we can't teleport them to the command center as it's too frightening for children. Because I guess that's a thing. And I guess that's the thing that would stop you from potentially ending this thing right away. And along with that, we also get the kids fighting against putties using dodgeballs, because again, that's this episode for you. But we eventually get to part 2 where the Rangers get trapped in a photo to where Alpha has to rescue them, and from that point forward, the rest of the episode just ends up being a generic filler episode, with Rocky being the only one to actually fight against the monster because of Sentai footage, leading to it creating a copy of Red Dragon Zord, only for that to not matter as they just instantly call the Megazord anyway. And the episode ends with more fighting against reborn G2 monsters, because I guess that's just what Power Rangers has turned to. But with that, we finally get to an episode that does progress the story of the season a bit, at least, the last one of the season, in The Wedding, Part 1, where again, the story at least progresses to some degree to where this ends up containing the return of Rita Repulsa, and has her being made young again to explain why she's played by a different actress, and has her putting a spell on Zed to get him to marry her. So that's something. Obviously, all this done due to the response from parents that were upset at Zed for being too frightening for their children. So through that, they decided to make Zed less threatening by having him marry Rita and essentially turning him into a comedic character due to the constant presence of his relationship issues with Rita, which is just such a bizarre turn for his character. Now, beyond that, we do see the Rangers and Bulk and Skull getting picked to represent Angel Grove High in Australia due to the fact that the movie was filmed in Australia, and they obviously just needed an excuse for everyone to be in Australia, which is also why we actually see very little unmorphed footage of the Rangers throughout this 3-parter, which again is why we get the Rangers spending most of their time morphed. It's why we get a lot of focus on Rita and Zed. It's why we get this subplot of Alpha turning evil. All this to allow them to film a batch of episodes here without the Rangers themselves being present for most of it. With the episode itself here ending with the Rangers being misled to teleport to a haunted mansion where they essentially remain for the remainder of this 3-parter, with them being ambushed by two monsters, because obviously, with the cliffhanger here being them not being able to teleport out, taking us to part 2, which ends up being a whole bunch of nothing, as we continue to see Rita and Zed prepare for their wedding, all while the Rangers end up escaping the monsters and find a way out of the mansion, only to get into a Megazord fight that is essentially just spliced footage, only to then be teleported back to the mansion, with us literally getting the cliffhanger of them being stuck again, which is so stupid, taking us to part 3, where we finally see the wedding occur, which again is surreal to see these monsters dancing around and celebrating with them, all while the Rangers go through a similar process again of escaping from the mansion. And we do see some unmorphed Ranger footage in the command center, though all that was pretty much just archive footage they reworked here. And we obviously get more spliced Megazord footage, to where the wedding is a series of episodes that people do claim as one of the better episodes of season 2. I disagree. I think this is a terrible 3-parter, a really massive waste of time, to where outside of the concept of Rita and Zed getting married, it really brings nothing to the table from my point of view. Really just feels like them meandering about just because they needed more content to air on the show, and obviously needed to do it all while they were actually filming the movie. That was obviously more of their priority. But with that, we then proceed to get another 3-part episode, with it starting off with Return of the Green Ranger, which also ended up being filmed in Australia, another one that is claimed to be one of the season's best episodes. Which, I mean, to be fair, it is certainly better than The Wedding, despite the fact that it actually has like really no real significance to the overarching plot. Though it is still a pretty nonsensical series of episodes that largely just feel like fan service here of having the Green and White Rangers face off against each other. Where here we do have Zed once again creating a plan of sending the Rangers back in time, though obviously differently than how they did it the last time, where Rita ends up getting help from Zoran's old rival, the Wizard of Deception, who creates a clone of Tommy and gives him the Green Ranger powers because I guess that's something he can restore, to which he ends up teleporting every Ranger outside of Tommy back to the late 1700s for some reason. So in part 2, we do see the Rangers in the past being saved by a girl who clearly has a crush on Adam and is also clearly Australian because again it was filmed in Australia. But finally, we do eventually see the Rangers being attacked by a group of rat monsters, which look ridiculous, though were actually originally made to be used in the movie, though were deemed too low budget looking to be used in the movie, to which that's obviously why they used them here. Meanwhile, back in the present, we do have Tommy facing off against his clone, which again is a cool fight, but again doesn't really feel like it has much weight to it, where it really just feels like they're doing it for the sake of fan service. The Green Ranger ends up winning the fight here and ends up ending the episode by calling on Dragon Zord and what ends up being unused Jew Ranger footage here, taking us to part 3 where we do get a, again, massive bit of fan service in Tiger Zord fighting off against Dragon Zord in what is very blatantly spliced footage, obviously combining footage from Jew Ranger and Die Ranger together, but obviously eventually the real Tommy ends up getting the upper hand, rescuing the others from the past, to which Adam gets a kiss on the cheek from the girl that saved them, as if that's gonna matter at all. While Tommy ends up defeating the Wizard, making the Tommy clone good now, I guess it was just that he had a spell on him. I guess. So the Rangers now go back in time to defeat the rats for good, only for the clone to decide to stay behind, as there can't be two Tommies at the same time, I guess. Again, all this not really making any sense. Along with the fact that we also see Adam meeting the girl's descendant in the present, who looks exactly like her, and just so happens to still be in Angel Grove, which is, again, a lot of the conveniences that happen with all these time travel episodes. And again, it also just straight up leads to nothing anyway. Anyway, with that, we get to our next episode, Best Man for the Job, another episode that aired after a 2-month break, which makes you question why they even bother considering these later episodes as part of the same season if they were going to continuously have these massive breaks in between them. But this actually ends up being a pretty fun filler episode here, where Kim and Tommy end up both running for class president, to which they end up having a spell put on them to make them competitive. And again, we do get some fun from them sabotaging each other, and we have them arguing in the middle of a putty fight. But also interestingly, this episode also contains some American Megazord footage, where the Dire Ranger mecha fight was one that was extremely short, so they decided to go out of their way to record American footage for it, which again, it's nice to see them try. Well, they could have obviously just not had a Megazord fight, which I feel like they've done that in the past. But again, to see them go out of the way to create their own Megazord fight here was pretty cool to see. But sadly, that is really the end of the good things about this season, as really the rest of the season's pretty bad, as we get to another filler 2-part episode, that being Storybook Rangers, to where we see the Rangers at a book fair, to where Kim finds a book from her childhood, Grumble the Magic Elf, to which Tommy ends up buying it for her, which is a nice little moment there. Though Rita obviously puts a spell on the book to where Tommy, Kim, and Rocky end up getting put inside of it, aka spending the rest of the episode in front of a green screen, which is just a massive waste of time, as we literally see them meeting Grumble and trying to finish the story so they can leave, only for Zed to try to sabotage them, which is just boring. And it takes us to episode 2, where we see the Rangers being unable to morph because they get caught in an avalanche, which freezes their morphers, which I guess is a thing. And just straight up a boring set of episodes here that ends with them fighting Mondo the Magician, aka the main antagonist of Die Ranger, who they defeat really easily, which is just really strange given the context there. But that's followed up by another 2-part filler episode called Wild West Rangers, an episode where Kim somehow gets sent through a time portal to the Wild West, to where she meets the ancestors of the Rangers, who all look exactly the same as their descendants and also just so happen to be friends. And all this is, again, really stupid. but they end up being rescued by the White Stranger, aka Tommy, because obviously, and Kim is taken to Ernest's juice saloon, which is also really stupid. But part 1 ends with Goldar going back in time as well to attack the town, where part 2 has Kim going to the command center to try to get help from Alpha and Zordon from the past, where she's given the other power coins to give out to help her in her fight, though is not given the pink power coin, as too much pink energy is dangerous. Obviously a line that has become very memeable in the modern day, though obviously Kim gives these coins to the ancestors to where they morph, which when they morph, they end up having handkerchiefs around their necks and cowboy boots, because I guess that's a thing. But again, just boring filler episode here that culminates in the White Stranger meeting Kim's ancestor, which is weird, as doesn't that imply that Kim and Tommy are related then, if they're gonna end up together? But whatever. We finally get to the finale of season 2, which ends up being Blue Ranger Gone Bad, a blatant filler episode where it's another episode of a girl crushing on Billy again, mixing that in with the other generic trope of Billy getting kidnapped and Zed creating a Billy clone that is a dick. Again, something we've seen a billion times now. And we see the clone convincing everybody but Tommy to give away their morphers and communicators, which again feels pretty dumb from their point of view considering how sketchy he was being. But obviously Billy ends up escaping and the Rangers end up succeeding, and the season culminates in the girl that had a crush on Billy revealing her project, it being a statue of him, which is creepy, but again, a bizarre way to conclude this season. A really dull episode to end the season on. But again, with that, that is all of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 2. A bizarre season. Again, one that was just so riddled with production issues that really did seem to harm the season for me, to where, again, I do think early on the season is actually pretty good. To where, again, despite the issues of having to deal with the transition between Jew Ranger and Die Ranger, I do feel like the season up until White Light really shows a lot of potential. Again, it does introduce this really menacing villain. It does start to have some more serialization in the series. It, again, had the overarching storyline of Tommy losing his powers. It had Missing Green, which was this great character piece on Jason. Again, White Light is this great way to reintroduce Tommy to the story. And again, I do think the first third or so of the season is actually pretty solid, but the back 2/3 is just terrible. And again, for a wide range of reasons. It's not just because Jason, Zach, and Trini end up leaving, though again, to be fair, it is a major reason of the issues with the middle portion of the season, especially when you're aware of the fact that they are missing, to where it does lead to a lot of that portion of the season coming off as ridiculous with the lowered quality of the show due to them having to write around the fact that those 3 characters are missing, along with the fact that they obviously have to introduce Rocky, Adam, and Aisha, which again has the terrible Ninja Encounter 3-parter. The power transfer episode makes no sense. And again, that leads to them having to waste time in developing these new characters over giving the older characters that much to really do. And then at the point where it feels like they're probably a bit more free to finally do stuff new, they then get harmed by the fact that the Power Rangers movie happened, and through that the season gets watered down once again into a barrage of multi-parters that are just boring, with them just being straight up filler. And while again, there is fun stuff in Return of the Green Ranger and even The Wedding, which again does progress the story slightly, there's also a lot of bad within a lot of it too. And again, it's just a season that I just think is probably worse than I remembered. It's a season that, again, while I can appreciate what they're doing early on in it, I think by the end, it's just a complete train wreck. To where I stand by my opinion that this is worse than season 1. But again, I feel like season 1 at least had a level of consistency. While, again, I do think it tries less than this season, and this season was obviously more harmed by things taking place outside of the context of the show, I do feel like season 1 feels like a more pure, enjoyable ride, while this one feels like one that was evolving from that, only to then just not, and ends up devolving into a really boring mess. But with that, those are my thoughts on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 2. Now, as I mentioned, I'll probably end up doing a video on the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger movie down the road, as, again, why not? Also, obviously, probably continue on with this series and making a season 3 video down the road, along with also probably Alien Rangers, which I'll probably separate into 2 videos just for the sake of it, I guess. And obviously, outside that, just expect the more typical content that I make on this channel, which is, again, typically not Power Ranger content. But again, ideally, I would like to do some more Power Ranger videos here and there, though, again, don't know how often they'll come, but maybe some periodically along the way. So stay tuned for those things. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.